Let's see.
It's starting to populate.
Great.
Yeah.
Morning, everybody.
Yes, good morning. We'll wait just a few seconds to get everybody on. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. I know we'll have some more joining as we go. We're delighted that you're able to join us this morning. We look forward to a great and productive webinar. I'm Suzanne Tomlinson, the Director of Research Programs for the Gulf Coast Consortia. If you're not familiar with the GCC, I invite you to visit our website at gulfcoastconsortia.org to find out more. This particular webinar is being hosted by our Junior Faculty Network as part of the This Is How I series. We are recording the webinar and it should be posted to the Junior Faculty Network page on the GCC by the end of the week. We invite you to visit that page as there are several resources there that are particularly relevant to junior faculty, as well as an idea and information exchange where you can post new topics and respond to existing topics. You'll also find latest news on new events and our program that provides grant review for junior faculty grants through our research consortium. I do want to take just a minute to highlight a few initiatives within the GCC that may be helpful for your research and your career. Our goal at the GCC is to facilitate collaboration, as that will be key for advancing your careers. We have such a unique opportunity here in the Texas Medical Center to collaborate with the best of the best across all of the GCC institutions. For those of you who don't know, the GCC has an MOU with all of the GCC institutions for shared core resources, which means that you're able to use designated shared cores at any GCC institution at internal rates. We can also help you locate equipment if you're needing something for your research. You just shoot us an email. We also have cross-institutional course registration, so your students and postdocs can take classes from any GCC institutions. We also administer a seed grant program for brand new collaborations across at least 2 different institutions. The deadline for this year was last week, but the 2021 RFA will be released in March of next year, so keep an eye out for that. We also work with GCC faculty to obtain multi-institutional research center and training grants, and we have several of both of those that you can learn more about on our website. Also, you all have my email address from the webinar invitation that I sent, so feel free to email me if you would like more information. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Dan Harrington. Dan is an assistant professor in the UT Health School of Dentistry, and he's been a wonderful colleague and key collaborator for many GCC initiatives. He's actually a founding member of the GCC Junior Faculty Network, where he still serves on the Executive Steering Committee. He's also a leader in our multi-institutional rigor and reproducibility program, and he's an active member in our Regenerative Medicine Research Consortium, as well as our NanoX cluster. He's one of those people who is not just about his own career, but sincerely wants to help others advance their research and careers as well. We're extremely fortunate to have him as a key collaborator, and I'm delighted that he's offered to give this webinar. I do want to mention that if you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A rather than the chat. We will address as many as we can during the last half of the webinar. With that, it's my privilege to turn this over to Dr. Dan Harrington. Dan?
Yeah, morning. Thank you, Suzanne, very much. Morning, everybody. I hope you're all doing well, whether you're still at home or if you found a way to get into your office. We've opened up a little bit at UT Health, but very, very slowly. So I was intending to put a little face mask on my picture from this morning, but didn't get to find one in time. But luckily, I'm social distancing anyway in this little room. I'm glad to talk to you about Slack this morning because it's clear there's some interest, and it's also one of those new, still pretty new platforms that feels ambiguous. If you don't know what it's meant to do, then it's hard to figure out how to implement it. It's hard to understand how you kind of start to bring it into your lab or your work group or your collaborations. So this was the flyer that went out, and we'll be following these points. What I'm going to do is go through a few more slides that give a little bit more about the GCC as part of an overview, but then we'll dig into Slack, talk about it and what its general paradigm is, workspaces and channels, what those mean, what's that terminology. I'll show you a few examples, some ways to customize it so you can have it not just be Slack, but reach out to your files that are on a server or on Box or Dropbox. It can put appointments on your calendar, it can launch Zoom, it can post to social media. There's a lot of things it can automate and talk to. What I'm really excited to tell you about is new PI Slack. So this is a Slack workspace that's dedicated to assistant professors. It's essentially, if you are a new professor and you feel like everybody else is somebody down the hall that they can talk to, and you feel like you're off on an island somewhere, new PI Slack is this great resource to say, why did my reviewer say this? Why did my chair say this? What am I supposed to do for getting to tenure? I'll get into that, and then we'll take some Q&A. But as I said, let me first just emphasize what Suzanne said about the GCC. It's a great collaboration of these local institutions, and provides all these resources for people who are new to Houston. This is maybe your first assistant professor job, and you're trying to figure out, where do I find that instrument that I had at my last institution? Or how can I find anybody to collaborate with? And the GCC is your way. And so there's plenty of kind of research consortia available on a variety of topics. As Suzanne mentioned, regenerative medicine is of particular interest to me, but these all cluster around people's interests and their research direction, so it's very faculty driven. The junior faculty network's available. There's a massive list of where to find that instrument you can't find. And although they're kind of closed for right now, there's a wide array of seminars typically happening, and multi-day events. So start poking your nose into the GCC if you haven't already. But what I'll do is get into Slack and tell you about how it can look in your group and in your collaborations. So the basic premise of Slack is that it's meant to be a collaboration tool. So I think the folks that put Slack together said email is okay, but it has its flaws, and messaging can be great sometimes, but it's not long-term kind of reliable. You know, you send a text message quickly and it disappears and you can never find it later. So Slack is meant to connect those elements and to help teams communicate better, quickly, preserve that dialogue, and then keep connected on projects or tasks. And so there's many things you can tie into Slack, file sharing, scheduling, video conferencing, and you'll see what those look like. So just to talk about those elements for a second, how do we communicate? Sorry, this is a little Mac heavy with the icons, but PC users is the same. For email, we send notes that have a very permanent feel. You send an email and it feels like it's very concrete, very much like sending a letter on paper. It's a way that people often attach files, for better or worse, and they preserve a long-term history with it, having an email trail. Texting is typically used for fast response, right? Like you're sending a quick note to somebody, you're checking to see if they're in. Can they quickly read over that document that you sent them? You rarely will send an email to say, look at this quickly. It has a conversational feel, and importantly, it's expanded from kind of its original use, and now it's, for better or worse, you might have ended up on a group text with somebody that you can't get out of with 6, 8, 10 people. But it can be one-on-one or it can be a group. And importantly, it's also fun. emojis are really common and a great response when somebody sends you something. For example, this says, coronavirus has me stuck at home and I really want to watch Tiger King. Can some teacher come and do homeschooling for my child? Easy. On Twitter and social media, there's another paradigm of kind of broadcasting something and having followers that follow your topic, different than either the other two. And so you'll have hashtags, you'll have mentions for you, somebody will at you for something. And so it's a different way to speak to a larger group. It's still pretty permanent. It might be a little hard to find long term, but it gives you this concept of a different way of communicating than the other two methods. And of course, DMs, you can send a direct message to somebody too. And all of these exist kind of on your laptop or desktop, but they also exist on your phone, right? So there's versions of these for your phone and arguably more important on your phone too. So Slack ties those all together. Those concepts that we're familiar with from email and texting and social media. And so just to make it really clear, it's an application. So it's not necessarily a website. You can interact with it as a website, but really it's an application that you either download onto your computer from slack.com or just go to the app store for your phone or your tablet and download it there. Once you do that, you need to figure out kind of how it fits in. And so Slack is something that enables fast text-like communication amongst your team members. So you might have a team of people, and I'll show you some examples of teams, but maybe it's your lab, maybe it's 10 or 15 people, or maybe it's your department, maybe it's gotten bigger than that. And what you're essentially just trying to do is send a quick note to somebody or start a conversation. What's important is that it preserves those team discussions and the history, and it's searchable. So the intent is for you to be able to say, in the lifetime of this project, 4 months ago, we were having a conversation about why we made a decision to take our research in this direction or to not look at those samples. I can't remember why. And Slack makes it easy to look back and try to find that conversation. It separates topics by hashtags, essentially channels. And so you create channels for whatever you want. It can be a project, it can be a topic. You'll see some examples here, but it's typically prefixed by a hashtag that I think a lot of us are familiar with from Twitter. It lets you share content, files, video, conferencing. You can have a whiteboard up. It is an easy way to share things in a static way so that as part of that project, the files are attached to an idea. Maybe you're posting the minutes in Slack, or maybe there's an image that you want everybody to see, data that you want them to review. You can easily put it into Slack and have people take a look. Importantly, Slack's been really good, along with a lot of the collaboration tools of the last few years, of integrating with other tools. And so it's really good at connecting to where you might have your files stored. You'll see a number of examples. And so what are some ways that Slack fits in? What might you put on Slack? You might say, hashtag general, hey everybody, it looks like one of our incubators is alarming. I'm at home, quarantined for COVID. Is anybody in lab to check it out? And that note is something that everybody sees. Your whole lab group, say, maybe 15 people. And if somebody's in lab, it'll come up on their phone and they'll know to go take a look. Or they can send a note and say, yeah, I'm there, I'll go check it out. If you didn't have this, you'd be starting a phone tree, you'll be sending an email that maybe people don't check very often. And so it's a fast way that's maybe a little more effective than a text message. Or hashtag seminars. Looks like the BioE seminar is going to be really good this Friday. So here's the abstract that you can take a look at as a PDF, and here's the Zoom link for Friday. So we do this all the time. If we find that there's going to be a great seminar coming up in the GCC or through other means, we'll post these up so that folks can know the seminar schedule for the year for a department or something that's coming up that's really terrific. I'll show you some examples. Here I've said to Alan and Tristan and Lindsay, hey everybody, here's the minutes from the conference call we had today with the University of Chicago team, and here's their latest data. So I've attached that Word file and that Excel document that has all the data. What's really nice though is I can not do that. I can instead connect a link that says, here's links to Google Drive where we have all that stuff stored. So you don't have to be sending documents necessary and eating up space necessarily. You can just point to wherever it's stored. If your team uses Google Drive or uses Box or Dropbox, you have the ability to just point to those locations, and everybody knows there's a permanent record in Slack that says the minutes got posted and I know where to go find them. Or you might say, hashtag microscope. We tried troubleshooting again with the 40x objective over the weekend, but Elements just kept giving this weird configuration. Here's what it looked like. Anybody see this? You know, this is super common for a grad student to be in lab and they're dying because they need to get that data and nothing's working. So they just take a picture with their phone and Slack it to everybody. So that's also key. Slack becomes a verb. You can Slack everybody that picture, and it might be 11:30 at night, but probably somebody's awake and they can send back a note that says, oh yeah, you just have to flip the lens or something. So it's a great way to get a fast answer and a reliable chain of communication. So how does Slack organize itself? There's two big concepts. One is workspaces. So when you're starting out with Slack for the first time, you've downloaded the app, it's on your computer or on your phone or both. You'll either join an existing workspace or create a new one. And a workspace is essentially the environment that exists where your team works. So you essentially make a workspace once. And so, for example, if you're making it for your lab or your research team or your organization at work, you create that workspace and you invite however many people are going to be involved. So 10 people, 15 people or more. And typically you'll do that one time, so you want it to be broad and comprehensive. And then you organize sub-projects beneath that as channels within each workspace. And I'll show you some examples. So a small workspace might be your lab group, maybe 5 to 30 people, or maybe it's your student organization, your postdoc association, although it's probably gonna be, postdoc's gonna be way bigger than that. But maybe it's your science outreach group or volunteering or something like that. And when you set it up, you give it a name. So maybe it's not the CRISPR lab, but it's the crispest lab at slack.com. Or you give it some other name that just represents your group. A medium-sized workspace might be something bigger like your department. So a department, for example, in a research institution, maybe it's 10 labs or something that each have 5 or 10 people. So you might call that biochem at, biochem medu at Slack. And they give you some suggestions about what to call your workspace and how to set it up when you first do that. And then a large workspace might be a large local or a national organization, hundreds or maybe even thousands of people. I put an example, first geners in science or some other group, but something pretty big. And so in all those examples, the paradigm's pretty similar. I'll say in academia, we typically use the free Slack version, which I'll tell you about. But in business, folks can pay for it and get more perks and have a system that expands for their whole institution. But these are some examples of what workspaces look like. And then the last thing I'll tell you about before we look at Slack and dive into it are users and channels. So users, for example, that's me. I guess that's could be my handle, it might be Harrington, and you put your picture and kind of some details about yourself. For each workspace that you're on, you create a new profile, usually linked to your email. So within that workspace, you are somebody. You're the whatever your role is in that organization. And within Slack, you can see your multiple workspaces available. But importantly, if you want to catch somebody's attention in your post, when you're posting something, you can include their username, like I did in that earlier example with Alan and Tristan, and they'll get a particularly a special attention on their phone. It'll call their attention for a notification to say this one's important for you. The other important thing for Slack are hashtags. So you have channels. For example, meetings or chores, you can see on the right. For our lab, we have those channels set up for chores and compressed gas. Yes, we have a channel for that. Equipment and general, etc. So they can serve any purpose. It could be a topic like we have for a lot of kind of functional uses. It could be project-based. You could say, it's my tissue engineering channel, it's my gene therapy channel, it's my, this cancer or this treatment. But essentially, you're just using it as a way to organize discussions, because you could just keep posting and it'd be hard to determine what's happening and where it should be sorted. Channels let you direct that a bit, and you can have people only invited to certain channels. Like, for example, everybody doesn't have to be invited to the gene therapy channel if they don't do that. And you can have private channels if you want to. So you can see a couple of those are locked. And that was in particular for the grads, was for a few of our grad students who just graduated, and we had to do a little planning for their graduations and their surprise signs that went up for them. So those are ways that you organize in Slack. So let's take a look. Let me pull up Slack and show you what it looks like. So what you're seeing right now, as it comes up on your screen, is a general Slack workspace. On the left are 3 different workspaces that I belong to. So the first one is my lab. The second one is TMC Innovation, the Texas Medical Center Incubator Hub. And the third is New PI Slack that I mentioned, and I'll go into more detail about. So in this one for our lab, you can see there's all the channels listed on the left side. And we just picked these as they fit our needs. Carpool we needed because we would come to the BRC at Rice periodically, and also we were at the dental school in South Campus. So sometimes you need a ride, chores, etc. You can also see a place where you can have direct messages with people, and you can see if they're online or not. I'll just show you some examples. So in seminars, for example, Saleh was complaining about why somebody would want to Zoom bomb a PhD defense, and we agreed with him. That's how we started putting passwords. I sent a note out saying, hey folks, in tissue engineering, there's a whole new set of tissue talks nationally that are coming up. And this gives an example. So you can see I posted some text talking about the thing that was happening. I can post a website. I can also attach some images. So I can click on it, and I attached this image talking about the talks that were coming and who was going to be there and all this information. And so in one time, it goes out to everybody who's in our group. We can see at the top that there's 18 members in this group right here, and just plenty of room to keep writing. Wow, that's a great lineup, and it is. AACR's former April meeting is now free. Here's the link. So it's a great way to share that information and not force people to read it, but it's available, and there's a history, and they can essentially shift their time at their leisure to pick it up. And it's a little bit less formal than email. I'll give another example. So orders. We were trying to find some penicillin. We couldn't find it necessarily. We wanted to find a cheaper one. Lizette was talking about it. Andre pitched in another one that looked like it was less. And we were trying to work out exactly which item number. It's a great way to do that. On our confocal, this is the example that Alan was having trouble trying to figure out why why his first dichroic mirror was invalid in this configuration. That might sound like gobbledygook, but it's super helpful for us to be able to say, he could send us the screen. People could say, did you figure it out? Maybe we have to contact Nikon to work on it. Slack's also good for fun. In Random, we were talking about how Brad Pitt did a great job looking like Tony Fauci over the weekend. One of our grad students had a glamour shot on the UTSD research website talking about kind of the reduction in lab efforts. And you can see that there's plenty of room for emojis down here. Everybody posts about they're laughing about it because it's so great, and the party parrot is spinning. There's custom Slack emojis that get made of people, but it's super fun. You'll see well, I can't show you, but new PI Slack has a ton of Slack emojis people make just to respond to people's postings. And lastly, for chores, for example, this gives us a great way to say, hey, I've lost track. Is it my turn for chores? Yes, absolutely, we're next week. Here's the chore calendar, etc. So that's a small group. We have about 20 to 30 people in our workspace. I'll show you briefly Texas Medical Center Innovation. They colored theirs a little different, so it's a little bit brighter, but there's fewer channels, and you can see that they post about, in general, there might be somebody come to talk about patent law. A startup company might be hiring, and they might post something here with a website to pass on to prospective candidates or details about the position. Random request, this group asked for folks to volunteer to help try out their new mobile app for a healthcare application. So this one is, I think, 700 or 800 people are in this. This is essentially anyone who's gone through TMCX. So you can see that Slack scales really well across small and large groups. So I'm going to jump back to slides here. And so we've gone through what is Slack and what do workspaces and channels look like and some examples. So let's talk about customization. You configure Slack in a few ways. The great news is that it's free to start, and it's free for a while. So a free workspace allows you to have 10,000 messages. They're all searchable. Once you get above 10,000, they start to roll out of view. Our lab has just reached that after a few years. So it's pretty good history. With that, you get 10 apps or integrations. So if you need to attach to Box or Dropbox or G Drive or something, G Suite, you can do that. You can do one-on-one video calls, and you get basic Slack features. If you want to pay, it's usually $5 to $10 a person per month. So it's really better suited for institutions, but that quickly gives you a full record of all your messages, and then unlimited apps and integrations, and even group video calling. But talking about those apps, for example, so Slack can connect to Zoom or to GoToMeeting or to WebEx or other video conferencing platforms. And the first time you might Slack out a Zoom invite, it'll very quickly say to you, looks like you're trying to send a Zoom invite. Do you want me to integrate that? And so it makes it really easy to then add Zooms quickly to your calendar to send out to folks. And it can also integrate well with Gmail and Google Calendar, file storage like Dropbox or Box or any of these others, Google Drive, project planning like Asana or Trello. If that's kind of planning that you do, Slack integrates with those. There's hundreds of things that Slack can attach to. So if you go to the Slack website, you can see what those are. And so far I've talked to you about how Slack works. If you want to sign up for it, you download the app and you decide either you join an existing workspace or you create your own through the Slack website. And then there's some ways to customize it. One thing in particular for junior faculty that I wanted to talk about was new PI Slack. And so what is it? New PI Slack is this group of assistant professors who have created a workspace that is solely dedicated to the issues that are involved with young faculty. Essentially, it's imagine if you were in your new job and you've got all these questions about how do I submit my first R1, or how do I pace myself for budget for my startup, or my chair just cut my startup, or suddenly I have all this new clinical duty, or what do I do with my students? And you've heard that other people have great colleagues to talk to, but you don't. you're in building 7 all alone on a hallway, and you feel like you got nobody to ask these questions about. New PI Slack is assistant professors across the country who've created a Slack workspace to just openly talk about this. The caveat is that it is confidential. I'm not going to show you anything about it today. And what I'll just tell you are some basic examples. People are asking really intricate questions. My chair is not being cool to me, or my chair was very discriminatory. It's very obvious. How do I handle this? And where that person's at. They're at the University of whatever school. So you know who their chair is immediately. And so it requires keeping a layer of trust there. And the consequence, though, is that people feel really comfortable asking these detailed questions because, who else are you going to ask? And I'll say conversely, there's other workspaces, many other workspaces for hundreds of thousands of other groups. So there's certainly those for mid-career faculty or senior faculty, or name your interest. This one's of real interest to junior faculty. Just the questions I listed. My technician isn't doing any work. Should I keep them? Or how do I motivate them to get going? I've said things many times. I have an Ames page, but I have no idea if it's any good. Would you read it? I'll give the example. Somebody just asked us to read her first page of her NSF Career Award that she's preparing for the summer. And within half a day, she had 8 people across the country willing to read it. And that's 8 pairs of eyes that have great feedback, have been through this before, have really good things to contribute. So I'll give some examples. Publication questions channel. Our paper came back for major revisions, but not rejected. It's from a big journal, but what does that mean? Are they serious, or are they just going to smack me down later anyway? Have you done it? What was your experience? Do you know that editor? A journal invited me to edit, but they look brand new. Are they a predatory journal? Like, what should I do? Parenting. I am going 100% crazy trying to homeschool and run a lab. Help. Sometimes it's just emotional release. People are just like, they just need to talk about it. My 9-month-old was sleeping, and all of a sudden my 9-month-old is not sleeping, and neither am I. Have you gone through this? How did you survive? Right now, with every daycare closed and lots of assistant professors having really young kids, they are struggling. And this channel is getting a lot of activity of people just saying, here's how I survived. Or give yourself some rest. Don't expect yourself to be pumping out a ton of publications when you're also running a home daycare. Humble brag. When you finally got your students F31, you've got your first paper from your lab, or you actually made it to tenure, and people go berserk, even for just the first paper, because they know what a big deal that is. And then the last one I've just put down there, training or mentorship. There's a lot of questions about how to do this, because just because you were able to get an assistant professorship doesn't mean you know anything about management. And so you can get a lot of great tips from people who say, I followed this book, I followed this motivational method. So what -80 freezers should I buy? I heard that, the ones from blank blank suck. Where should I go? Or why can't I ever get my microscope tech to respond? Or I know that they are 30,000 over the price I want. How can I go find a place to exercise? all these kinds of things. And so if that's of interest to you, down there is the website to look for signing up for New PI Slack, and you'll have to give some detail about yourself and your academic status, etc. So in summary, I'll say Slack is this, like any of these modern tools, a little ambiguous at first, but hopefully you can see that it's a way to combine the history of email, but with a feel that's a little more informal, a lot of fun sometimes, and feels like a text message, but gets retained over time and lets you build a history of collaboration for your group. And so you can either join an existing workspace, and if you're wondering where to find those, you can honestly just Google them sometimes, or ask a group and say, do you have a Slack workspace set up yet? Or you can just set one up for your own group, set one up for yourself, and be the only person in it. But then once you feel a little bit comfortable, you can invite your students, and they probably have already been on 2 or 3 other workspaces themselves. So, it's not that hard to get it started. Remember that you can integrate with a lot of other tools. And so, especially for file storage, that's a great place to point to files and create for your Slack workspace a static location that shows when a new student comes into the lab, where do they look first? What are the rules for that lab? Or if somebody's joining your organization, what are the first phone numbers they need to have that are important? And lastly, this is an app, and so you just have to download it. It runs on your computer, on your tablet, or on your phone, or all. So with that, I will take questions from folks. Please enter them in the Q&A, and as soon as they come up, I'll start do my best to answer them.
So thanks, Dan. While we're waiting for people to submit questions, I had a couple. You had mentioned maybe if you had several users and wanted to upgrade, that might be something for the institution. Do they have like a multi-user license that they can grant institutionally, or have you heard of that? Is that something that any of our institutions are doing?
I haven't seen anybody set it up locally. I've seen some institutions pick up. I think Rice had a institutional subscription to Asana. I think UT just got one for Trello. I don't think I've seen one for Slack yet, but I could be wrong on it. But you can see the cost. It can add up if you have a lab of 10 people, and just the basic paid workspaces, I think about $100 a year. So it's a fair bit, but some people would say that that's totally worth it. And so to keep an organized lab. Other people use Basecamp or these other tools, and Slack has a lot of elements that are similar to that. So I could see it being of value, something you could write into your grants.
Okay. Looks like
I do
we
see
have
some
a couple of questions there. Can you see them, Dan?
Yeah, I can. I'll start. David Jeter asks, can you send a message to a user who's not in your workspace? You have to be in the workspace to send a Slack message. There's integrations with Gmail, for example, so you could have something end up going out as an email message or out to Twitter or something else, but you typically need to be in that workspace, from my experience, to be able to participate. Jesse asks, do you have any tips on creating a Slack culture for your lab group? I think it forms organically. I think it mimics what I've seen. It mimics the lab's culture. So I think if you have a lab that likes to pal around a little bit, or nudge, give each other little nudges now and then, they'll do that on Slack. I I was posting something about childcare or something when COVID first happened, and one of our lab members found an old picture of me from a journal article like a long time ago that had been hidden, I thought. And they pulled it out and made a great Slack emoji of me with that fantastic picture. I did not have COVID hair as I do right now, but it was pretty funny. And so anytime almost anytime I post, like 5 people will respond with that. So I think if you have a lab culture that is fun and trusting, then it mimics that. I would hope that Slack wouldn't turn into little digs or things like that. I've not seen that really happen. I think people are still pretty respectful. So I'd say, you can build spaces for fun on Slack. David Jeter asks, do you get overslacked? Too many messages? Yeah, not for our lab, for example. Really, if there's slacks coming across, then it's probably something important or a conversation that you want to see. New PI Slack, for example, it's a lot. I mean, it's thousands of people, and so it can be a real waterfall of messages. But I try to keep up with it because inevitably it's of value. And for that many people, the 10,000 limit gets reached really quickly. And so there's a lot of history that isn't preserved. And they do that deliberately because it's such sensitive information. I think they're happy to see it disappear. And so people know that there's a risk they might have to repeat themselves. Somebody might ask again for a recommendation on a -80 freezer. That happens a lot. But the next time you see it, you might be the one who gets to answer, and you build up camaraderie with other people. There's a channel called Random Coffee. At the beginning of each month, if you're in Random Coffee, you get paired up by the Slack bot to have coffee virtually with somebody from across the country who's in that channel. So I just got paired up with somebody I don't know, and that person and I will have coffee sometime soon. And so you get to cheer for people when they have these successes. You get to be cheered for, even if it's a minor success. This weekend I wrote on New PI Slack that I was so frustrated that there was a grant I could have gotten in on Friday and I was just too wiped out. But I'd gotten 3 other things in over the last week or so. And a bunch of people wrote and said, you know what, you got a kid that you're watching over the afternoons. You got 3 things in. Don't beat yourself up, and it's great. It's great. Every once in a while you need that. So yeah, you can get overslacked, but what's good is that at the top of the window, you can just go to the new messages and you can quickly clear everything that you haven't seen if you need a reset, and then let them start coming in again. And for new PI Slack, I don't have it on my phone alerting me because it would be going off every moment. Elizabeth, to join new PI Slack, what kind of verification do you need? To be honest, it's been a little while, but it's all on that website. So I will go back to it and just show that to you. You can Google it, but it's this web address. They have really clear instructions. There's not a lot there, honestly. That's just a portal, just a WordPress page, but you send them a note and then they'll add you on. And what I'll say is a great feature of new PI Slack is there's a Google Drive that has examples of a successful F31, somebody's DP2, all these, kind of when somebody's had a grant or 2 that's worked, where they have a tip or something, they put it into the folder so that folks can go look. Imagine, right? Wouldn't you love to know how to write a better face page for an R1? And honestly, you can, when I get my next grant's first page ready, I'm going to send it out and ask them to look at it. So it's a great resource. But, I forget exactly how I did it, but it's pretty clear from that website.
So in line with what Elizabeth asked, did you have a sense that there was some sort of screening or vetting on their side to ensure that this group really is just new PI assistant professors.
Yeah, yeah, there is. And you know, full disclosure, I asked them, I asked the, like, there's a little board of directors of the folks who first formed this, and I sent them a note saying, hey, we have this webinar coming up. Can I talk about new PI Slack? What can I show? And they said, yeah, we're fine with that. Just let's not show anything that's on the screen, because
Sure.
people are you know, posting things that are in full confidence. So my understanding is that there is some screening that happens.
Okay. Well, this is great information, Dan. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who attended. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I can put you in touch with Dan, and if I can't answer your question. And we again hope that you'll visit the junior faculty webpage and stay tuned for what this group does next. Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.